plan. He's not doing anything willy-nilly, haphazard. Everything is by design, both what He causes directly and what He permits indirectly. It's all designed. God's not foolish. He's not constantly playing catch-up. The languages of the world are not an afterthought to an unforeseen sin. So if not, we got questions to answer. Why did He permit this kind of rebellion? And why did He respond to it the way He did in view of His everlasting purpose to glorify Christ crucified, whom He had in His mind before the foundation of the world, according to Revelation 13:8, as we saw last time? The languages of the world are judgment upon arrogant, presumptuous, God-belittling unifiers of global rebellion. And they are vastly more. Vastly more. So we ask again, how does this spectacular sin and the consequences of divided peoples, divided languages, glorify Christ? And I wrote down 5 ways. Number 1, God's division of the world into different languages hinders the rise of global, monolithic, anti-Christian states that would have the power to simply crush all Christians with one dictatorial edict. You know, we often think of the multiplicity of languages and their accumulating cultures as a hindrance of the spread of the gospel, of the glory of Christ. That's not the way God thinks about it. God is way more concerned with unity than diversity in the world. Way more concerned. God knows something you may not know about if, in fact, there were no restraints on global anti-God unifying efforts. Those efforts could crush His people in a moment. And God uses means. You can push back against God if you want and say, I wouldn't have done it that way. Just snap your finger and wipe out the enemy. Why are you putting in place these human restraints? Well, He's God, not you and not me. So I bow, I learn, I listen. He's got a drama to play, and He's writing it. So, the first way that this punishment on this sin glorifies Christ is that it puts restraints on Christ destroying anti-God unity in the world. It makes it impossible. So in one of my questions I asked at the beginning, is it a good thing that there are hundreds of nation states in the world that spend most of their times being nervous about each other? My answer is, you better believe it's a good thing. Number 2 is a second way that the story of the Tower of Babel glorifies Christ. Suppose someone asks, now, in view of what you just said, isn't there going to be, at the end of the age, one of those big, monolithic, worldwide states? Isn't that in Revelation somewhere? Isn't that in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2? And the answer is yes. In the last day, God will loosen the restraints. Something is holding back the man of sin. God will loosen the restraints of Antichrist. Paul calls him man of lawlessness. John calls him the beast. Loosen the restraints. There will rise a great global attraction. There will be horrific persecution of believers. So much so that had he not shortened those days, even the elect, gone, he says. But there's a link between that coming event and the Tower of Babel. It makes me see that not as a contradiction to God's design I already expressed. The word Babel, 236 times or so in the New Testament, Old Testament. Translated virtually every time except a handful. Babylon. Not Babel. This is Babylon. This is scorn on Babylon. Not some little dinky city. This is comment about the origin of the great whore. The great harlot who gets drunk in the last day on the blood of saints. That's what's going on here. Now, what becomes of her? The book of Revelation describes this Babylon, which represents the great city, mercantile, professional powers of the world exalting themselves against God and against His anointed, raging. What becomes of her? Let me read you just a few verses, and you listen to the words from Revelation for echoes of Genesis 11. Her sins are heaped high as the heaven. As she glorified herself and lived in luxury, so give her a like measure of torment and mourning, since in her heart she says, I sit as queen. I am no widow, mourning I shall never see. Alas, alas, you great city, you mighty city Babylon, for in a single hour your judgment has come. Yes. In the last day, God will loosen the reins. There will be a man of sin, a man of lawlessness, an antichrist, a beast. And there will be an uncanny attraction to him across cultures and languages. Christians will endure horrific persecution. And then, on the clouds of heaven, the Lord God Almighty, Jesus Christ, will slay him with the breath of His mouth. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 7, verse 8. And Babylon will be no more. All the towers will have come down, and in that day the Lord alone will be exalted. That's where this text is pointing. Number 3, the sin of Babylon, God's judgment on it leads to the global glory of Christ this way. It puts in place a situation of languages, peoples, such that when Christ undertakes to lay claim on the world, He lays claim on every language and every people, and in being able to lay claim with authority and effectiveness through missions on every language, His glory shines the more brightly than if we all spoke the same language and He just took us that way. for God to break in on every language.